You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 9th of October 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up.
Lives are literally at stake right now. People are losing their home with no hope of ever being able to reconstruct or return.
Is the US presidential election's October surprise an act of God? Also coming up, we'll hear the latest from the ASEAN Summit in Laos as defence dominates the agenda, and we check in with our man in the Balkans.
Bosnia battles the aftermath of devastating floods and landslides. Kosovo capitulates in its Serbian trade war, and Belgrade's mayor takes on the partisans. All coming up on a Balkans roundup with me, Guy Delaunay.
Plus the papers, and we hear about Europe's first film festival dedicated to journalism. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in today's news. Hezbollah militants have targeted Israeli soldiers near to the Lebanese border a day after Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the military had killed the successor to Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah. Mozambique votes today in a general election highly likely to deliver victory to the ruling party. Frelimo has governed the nation for the best part of half a century. And Turkey has banned the instant message service Discord days after Moscow did the same. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, nature has decided to play a part in this year's US presidential elections. Hurricane Helene has done its worst to the key battleground states of Georgia and North Carolina. Both President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris rolled up their sleeves last week and went to the scene. Donald Trump, however, at a rally in Michigan last week, said the following.
They stole the FEMA money just like they stole it from a bank so they could give it to their illegal immigrants.
So what political damage could Helene do? And what next with Hurricane Milton heading towards the Florida coast and expected to create a second wave of devastation? Well, I'm joined now by Natasha Lindstedt, who's Professor of Government at the University of Essex. Good morning to you, Natasha.
Good morning.
Before we start to look at the political sides of things, we do need to touch on what is happening in Florida. You have family there at the moment, and the mayor of Tampa has told residents who don't evacuate their homes for Milton that you are going to die, and even President Biden has stepped in, that this is the worst storm to hit the American state in a century. We are dealing with a very live, dangerous situation at the moment, aren't we?
Yes, I would agree. This is one of the worst storms that we've seen, definitely for Western Florida. It's just so massive. I mean, I think you can see it even when you're just kind of looking on the map, that it's going to be affecting a much wider range of cities and counties than any other hurricane probably in 100 years. So 5 million people have had to evacuate. Some of my family have had to evacuate. Some have not been told to evacuate, so that must mean that it's going to be not quite as damaging for them. But it's incredibly scary when you have these storms that are growing. They're stronger, they're bigger, and they last longer. And that's, I think, the trend that is so concerning for Floridians. What
has happened this time around is that we are dealing with extreme weather events, Hurricane Helene, Hurricane Milton, and yet it has turned into a political storm as well. How has that happened?
I mean, I think this is just something that has been a part of the Trump era, that something that should be very apolitical, providing relief to people in need after they've been faced, before, during, and after they faced a natural disaster. And Trump has politicized it you could hear it in the clip, by talking about the Democrats stealing money, siphoning off federal aid, and then giving it to immigrants. I mean, this is just completely ridiculous. That's actually why the Biden administration has had to create a counter information campaign. They've done it through Reddit. as well, just to try to be able to reach people as far and wide as they can, because these types of rumors are just so incredibly unhelpful. And we have been hearing more stories about the way the just the way Trump himself has personalized things, where if people didn't vote for him, he doesn't want to give them federal aid. That was one of the stories that came out, that back in 2018, where there were horrible wildfires ravaging California, he didn't want to give the Californians any aid. It wasn't until one of his aides let him know that actually there were millions of people in California that voted for him, such as in areas such as Orange County, and that was actually more than the entire state of Iowa. But this is the danger here when you have this type of personalistic style of leadership, that it's really about loyalty tests. I mean, this is something you would only see in like dictatorships, where only the supporters and the municipalities that supported a particular leader would be the recipients of aid. And I think that's really scary moving forward if Trump is elected, especially because of Project 2025 and the desire to really gut the federal government.
I think what most people have been surprised by is the affirmative decision to mislead the public about a genuine crisis. There is one thing when you mention or you sow discord or you suggest things that might be to do with a political situation or a plan or a track record that could be put into question. But to actively mislead people when it could actually stop them from getting help, what risks and what dangers does that pose on the ground, for starters?
Well, it could pose risks if there is misinformation that people shouldn't evacuate. And now here's where, at least in the state of Florida, there has been clear information from mayors and the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, that people need to evacuate. But when natural disasters are underplayed, and this happened actually with COVID, with the underplaying of COVID by Trump, which obviously accelerated the number of cases and led to one of the highest death tolls in the world, that when you have someone leading the country that doesn't care about facts, that doesn't care about sowing chaos, discord, and confusion, it can be incredibly dangerous. Of course, in the U.S., you have other people in charge that are trying to ensure that the accurate information gets communicated, but these mixed messages can be incredibly dangerous.
Tell us about the Kamala Harris response and the response from the White House. I mean, let's hear a little bit about what she said yesterday in response to these accusations that Trump and Vance had been making.
And it is the height of irresponsibility and, frankly, callousness. This is so consistent about Donald Trump. He puts himself before the needs of others. I fear that he really lacks empathy on a very basic level to care about the suffering of other people and then understand the role of a leader is not to beat people down, it's to lift people up.
Natalie, how satisfied are people with her response?
So I thought she had a pretty good response, because the question was also asking why Ron DeSantis, who's the governor of Florida, was upset with the fact that she had been only calling him just now, having to do with Hurricane Milton, and hadn't really contacted him before. And she explained this is a hurricane that's sort of like a once-in-a-century type of hurricane, that this is not about politics right now. This is not about trying to win an election. This is about the fact that people's lives have been completely devastated. And she explained the story that she had met with a family who had lost a family member, lost their husband, lost a father, and how devastating it is, that it's not just that people are losing their homes, that they're actually losing loved ones, and that Trump doesn't understand this. I think that's what she was able to articulate pretty clearly. What
could happen, though, now, Natasha, is that the hurricane could affect the way that this election goes. It's from the moment of the idea that the storm having destroyed some polling places or locations being inaccessible because of damaged infrastructure. Questions are now being raised about whether Hurricane Helene and perhaps Milton could actually turn this election in favour of Trump.
I mean, that's a really good question. I was looking into it, whether I think it might matter. I mean, on the whole, I don't think it's going to have a big impact. Both North Carolina and Florida have early voting, there's mail-in voting, and so there's other ways that people can vote. I wonder how people feel about, honestly, the misinformation campaign that Trump has been leading, and whether that could backfire against him. The last time a hurricane really affected politics was Hurricane Katrina back in 2005, and that really turned the tides against George Bush Jr. He wasn't running for re-election, but that helped in some ways turn the public against the Republican Party, which then led to the election of Obama. That being said, in such a close election as this election is, everything matters. And I think it's going to be important for at least Kamala Harris's campaign to articulate the dangers of a Trump administration, given that so many of these states in the Southeast are so affected by climate change, and that he wants to roll back regulations on climate change, and also that he will personalize the aid that's given, that he's not going to focus on all Americans, but it's going to be more of a focus on who is loyal to him and who is not.
And when we look back on the 2024 presidential election, will we consider Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton as the October surprise?
That's a really good question, but I don't know if that's what's going to change people's minds. It's definitely affected both campaigns because Harris has had to stop campaigning and is focused on her role as vice president and trying to attend to the affected areas. But I don't know if that's going to be the October surprise. Nothing as close as what happened in October in 2016 with James Comey claiming they're investigating Hillary Clinton's emails. I think it's not going to quite have that magnitude.
Natasha Lindstedt there. Thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're with The Globalist. $1,300 in Vientiane and 1712 here in London. We turn our focus now to this week's ASEAN Summit, the moment when Southeast Asia's countries are supposed to come together to act in tandem. Predominating the conversation, however, is the security of the region and the rather split views of the member states. Well, I'm joined now by James Chambers, Monocle's Asia editor, who joins us on the line from Bangkok. A very good afternoon to you, James.
Good morning, Emma.
So let's just talk about what the priorities are for the ASEAN meeting. I mean, the main meat and drink is in the next couple of days, isn't it?
That's right. I mean, as you said, the ASEAN meetings are the main thing in Southeast Asia. There are 10 member states, and they get together normally twice a year, depending on the host, because the hosting duties rotate. But in this case, when it's one of the smaller, poorer countries, the two annual summits can be combined into one, just to kind of lessen the burden. So the 45th and the 44th and the 45th summits are happening back to back, and they kick off today, and they will run for the next few days. So this is the chance when the 10 leaders of each of the member states are meant to be gathering in Vientiane in Laos, to talk all things Southeast Asia. But there's been a lot of changeover in a lot of these countries. So not everyone is present, and some of the people who are there are very new.
So explain to us the changes that we're seeing.
Well, I guess some of the new faces are, Thailand's Prime Minister, Paetongtarn Shinawatra. She's 38, very young. It's her first ASEAN summit. She's only weeks in the job. I guess one of the more significant ones will be in Singapore. Their new Prime Minister, Lawrence Wong. This will be his first ASEAN as leader. And I guess another thing to point out is perhaps the noticeable absentees. This is the first ASEAN summit in a long time which won't have Jokowi. The Indonesian president isn't coming this year, and that's because he's just about to hand over power. He stands down on October 20th, so he's decided not to go this year, and he's sending his VP. And Indonesia is one of the biggest backers of ASEAN in many respects, as is Singapore in a way. So with the fact that Jokowi is not there, and the fact that Laos, one of the smaller countries, is hosting, I guess you have to kind of temper expectations.
Let's hear now from Alessio Patalano, professor at King's College London and an expert on Asian defence. Good morning, Alessio.
Good morning, Emma.
So in this moment of change and shifting roles, we have the predominating issue of defence, don't we? I mean, how much is this taking control of the agenda?
Well, that's a very good question. I think, at the moment, provided that we're talking about a meeting that is taking place in Laos, Laos is definitely very cognizant of the limits of their influence within ASEAN. I think it's going to be very much the sort of summit whereby you try to do mitigation and in particular try to limit what at the moment is already an incredibly tense kind of space. So in particular, I think the problems concerning tensions in the South China Sea will be discussed, but very much within with the aim of trying to contain and place the current level of tensions within a manageable and sustainable element. And then, of course, there's a 5-point plan for Myanmar, which is probably going to be a much higher priority in that respect, given how it affects the whole sort of ASEAN context.
Let's deal with the management of tensions at the moment. I mean, what exactly do we mean by that and mitigation, Alessio?
So I think there's going to be a couple of different line of efforts, if you want. You'll have the meetings taking at the margins of ASEAN, and certainly the new Japanese Prime Minister, Mr. Ishiba, will meet with these counterparts from China. So there will be conversation among the major powers in the region in trying to, if you want, clarifies and perhaps deliver from a political perspective what the red lines are. And certainly the type of pushing around, the type of a confrontation that we've seen moving from the Second Thomas Shoal to Sabina Shoal in the past few months are likely to be part of that conversation. And then, of course, you have ASEAN Plus meetings. So the ASEAN countries meeting with Japan, China, and South Korea. And it is very likely that within that context, the Filipinos will make sure that their concerns are voiced, that their concerns are addressed. So clarifying what's not acceptable, I think, is going to be at the very least part of the elements of the conversation that plays.
Just staying with you on this one, Alessia, are we talking about the South China Sea Code of Conduct here, which is an ASEAN agreement here? Because it's a question of how each individual country manages its relationship with China and its military. Is that correct?
I think that's absolutely right. I don't think that we will see any particular progress on the Code of Conduct, which is why I didn't mention really. It's definitely on the agenda. But I think trying to find things you can talk about, and certainly sort of energy targets, growth. These are the sort of things that ASEAN summits always are. It's important to have on the agenda because it allows to have a positive, constructive conversation. Other subjects like the Code of Conduct are much more thorny, much more complicated, and so long so there is no significant setback, that's progress in a way. And I think that's what we are looking at. However, that does not mean that the conversation about the Code of Conduct is not going to be at the center of the attention in the next round of summit meetings when the different actors, including the chair country, will be in a position to push the agenda a bit further. But at the end of the day, this is seen first and foremost at the moment as a problem that particular countries are having with China. Therefore, it is likely that we will see some focus on the bilateral side of the conversation, and in particular making look like, this is a problem that the Philippines and China have to talk about. This is a problem that Vietnam and China need to talk about. And living in that in that space also makes up for ASEAN not having to talk collectively at this stage in order to find a solution. Again, mitigation here is the objective.
James, let's move to something else equally thorny and complicated, which is Myanmar. The bloc's been chaired by 4 countries since the coup, Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, and now we're in Laos. No one knows how to resolve this, do they? What is the sticking point?
Yeah, I think if you draw up the agenda for ASEAN every year, you can just stick down South China Sea, Myanmar, and add the kind of the problems with the Mekong, with the damming that happens in China upriver. Those big 3 issues just keep on, rolling on year after year, and it goes to the very heart of ASEAN. The ASEAN member states, the agreement is everything's done by consensus. So all 10 member states have to be on board or nothing happens. And they also have a policy of non-interference. So it's not like they have many tools at hand to try and kind of solve the mess that is Myanmar. I mean, the civil war it continues to rage. You keep hearing reports about how the government, the junta, is struggling and actually on the back foot. But it swings back and forth, and ASEAN countries don't tend to interfere. But then within those 10 member states, there are factions and there are big splits. So people tend to talk about the kind of continental countries, like Laos and Thailand and Vietnam to an extent, and Myanmar. They kind of try and they kind of see things in a similar way. And then the maritime countries like your Indonesia and your Singapore, they're the ones who tend to be pushing harder on Myanmar, but they're not on Myanmar's doorstep. They're not like Thailand, who shares a border with Myanmar and has to deal with all the refugees coming pouring over when the fighting flares up. So it's not like all sides are in agreement. It's a very thorny issue, and even if they were, there's not much they can do. It's not like the EU trying to deal with problem members like Hungary, where they can kind of cut off huge funding. ASEAN has a remarkably small budget, so the best thing is just to get everyone around the table and talk, and that is the success of ASEAN, but it's also one of its major weaknesses. So as with the South China Sea, I wouldn't expect any movement on Myanmar. And I think if Laos wants to achieve anything, it's the things that will perhaps help the people of ASEAN develop, kind of economically. The theme of this year's summit is connectivity and resilience. I mean, it's got nothing to do with the big issues that we've been discussing. I mean, it's all about trying to improve connections between the countries and build resilience. So, I mean, that's what Laos focusing on, and so I guess we'll hope that they can at least deliver something along those lines.
James Chambers and Alessio Patalano, thank you both very much for joining us on The Globalist. Still to come on today's programme.
Companies are really looking into interesting materials that we haven't necessarily used before, which means we're actually going to be able to build and make things in a way we haven't previously.
Nick Moniz brings us a rapid-fire resume about the trends and patterns emerging from the global design scene. Stay with us.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
7:23 here in London. Let's continue with today's newspapers. Excuse me. Joining me in the studio is author and political journalist Terry Stiasny. A very good morning to you, Terry.
Good morning.
How's life in the Stiasny world? I mean, there's moments of epic change going on. Books finished, children departing.
Delivered a son to university, delivered a book to my editor. So I'm suddenly, at a bit of a loose end. But, plenty to keep me busy.
Time for a lie down.
Yes, definitely.
Or we can fill your time by asking you to look at the newspapers for us.
Definitely, always.
What's in there today?
Okay, well, interesting. The first story, which makes the front page of the Financial Times and a lot of the other UK papers this morning, is quite a worrying warning from the head of MI5, Britain's sort of internal security service. And the headline on the FT, which is not normally one for sort of, scaremongering headlines, says Russian spies plan mayhem on British streets, warns MI5 chief. And, he's given quite an unusual public speech saying really how instances of spying against the UK have gone up. He says 48% in the past year. In particular, Russia on a sustained mission to generate mayhem on British and European streets, including arson, sabotage and dangerous actions conducted with increasing recklessness. Not only that, but also Iran is using criminals from international drug traffickers to low-level crooks to serve as proxies for Tehran, he says, and saying that MI5 basically has a hell of a job on its hands to try to cope with this increase.
2 points that sort of shocked me when this story broke yesterday, and everybody sort of started to rush around in chaos, thinking, how do we actually tell this story? Firstly, his timing. I mean, the world is in a moment. There are so many extreme pinch points happening at the moment across the world. One wonders whether Ken McCallum's words are actually going to sort of slightly dissipate as we deal with the more pressing issues of everything else. But secondly, go.
Yeah, Karen, no, I think also the timing is 3 weeks before the UK budget. So there is also a slight element of, look at all this stuff that we have to cope with. Perhaps we need some more money to help us cope with it.
I was wondering whether Ken's cap was being doffed, sort of like removed. And
Sorry, I knew it was a second thing.
No, the second thing is, and you as an expert in language, in communication, also you're quite good at spies. Your last book is about spying, isn't it?
Yeah.
So would the spies of yesteryear that you've been writing about in the last few years and months use words such as mayhem and chaos and MI5 has one hell of a job on its hands? It's that really difficult balance that must be struck when you are dealing with serious issues and serious business, not to dramatise too much, or what kind of reaction is he trying to get here?
I think he is obviously trying to worry people. He's obviously also trying to say, we're having success with this. We are dealing with this. We are doing well. And I think in terms of the past, from what I've read, people certainly would have used that kind of language in private in their documents when they're talking to one another. But of course, we never acknowledged that they existed until about 30 years ago in Britain. And so they never spoke in public. And so there was no kind of public pronouncements from the head of MI5 because they didn't officially exist.
So what's changed? I mean, would you have argued that someone might have taken him to one side and said, perhaps don't use the word mayhem because it's not going to sort of provoke panic in the streets, but it's not going to make us feel great?
No, I think it does worry people, but maybe that is, what they are trying to do. Maybe they sort of think that people aren't worrying about this enough, and they're trying to sort of talk to politicians and others and say, look, this is something that we need to deal with. I mean, I found one of the really interesting lines in what he said yesterday was that there had been an increase in the number of under 18s that they are investigating, and a threefold increase, saying 1 in 8 terrorists now being investigated in the UK are minors who are often recruited online, and saying these young people are driven by far-right terrorism, skewing heavily towards young people and driven by propaganda that shows a canny understanding of online culture. So I think this is something that they obviously haven't seen before, and is again a big question of how exactly you deal with it.
Let's move on to a story in the Times and also in the Washington Post, the relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin.
Yes, well, following on, interestingly, obviously from the previous story, this is Bob Woodward's new book. Of course, Bob Woodward, who's been writing about this kind of thing for the last 50 years or so, and he said that Donald Trump is understood to have held as many as 7 phone calls with President Putin since he left the White House in 2021, and this has apparently continued throughout the war in Ukraine. He would order aides out of his office when he's making these phone calls from Mar-a-Lago so that the conversations would be private. And even apparently in 2020, during the pandemic, he is reported to have sent COVID tests for Putin's personal use, which they agreed to keep secret. I mean, it's just astonishing. I mean, I will come on to the statement from the Trump campaign, which is quite withering, but it's just quite astonishing. This.
It sort of smacks of, it sort of boils it all down to 2 slightly oddball characters, to put it mildly, sort of sharing secrets towards each other. I mean, one wonders where the official checks and balances are when it comes to this. I mean, what is the general protocol when it comes to former leaders ringing each other up and sending each other COVID tests?
Well, I can assume, that if you still got their number and you can still get a call put through. I mean, plenty of former leaders, you imagine still chat to one another, but it's not normally seen as, a potentially sinister and worrying thing. Because I guess, if you knew each other and your people will still take the call, maybe that works. But I just love the statement from the presidential campaign here, saying that none of these made-up stories by Bob Woodward are true and are the work of a truly demented and deranged man. He says this book either belongs in the bargain bin of the fiction section or used as toilet tissue. Woodward is a total sleazebag who has lost it mentally. So that's a bit of a rant there coming in from the Trump campaign concerning the book.
We're examining quite fruity language today. Finally, let's look at a story in The Guardian. Wrinkles are not anything that many people feel massively happy about, unless you're an elephant.
Yes, unless you're an elephant. I love this. I did not know, perhaps you knew more than me, perhaps you studied, that elephants can be either left-trunked or right-trunked. So we are right-handed or left-handed. I am left-handed. Elephants have a preference for which side of the trunk they use. The Guardian reports on a study done by the Humboldt University in Berlin. And apparently 50-50, whether you're a left-trunked elephant or a right-trunked elephant. And the way that you can tell, as a scientist, is where the whiskers are and the wrinkles are. So if you're a left-trunk one, you have more... It stands to reason, I suppose. If you're using your left-hand side of your trunk more often, it gets more wrinkly and you have longer whiskers on the left-hand side of the trunk. And because, when the trunk bends round to pick something up, the ones on the other side get worn away. So, if you're closely observing an elephant, and you can look at it and work out which side of its trunk it prefers to use. And if you're the manufacturer of trunk anti-wrinkle cream, if you are, your market is going to be bigger in Asia than Africa, apparently. Yes, they have more wrinkles. Yeah, African elephants have two finger-like structures on the tips of their trunk. Yes, they have more. The wrinkles make the trunk more flexible, a bit like the folds of an accordion. So there we are. Who knew? We now know, thanks to you, Terry Stiesny. Thank you for coming into the studio. That was Terry Stiesny there, bringing us the newspaper review. The time here in London is 7:31. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A look now at what else we're keeping an eye on today. Hezbollah militants have targeted Israeli soldiers near to the Lebanese border. The attacks come a day after Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the military had killed the successor to Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah. Mr. Netanyahu did not mention Hashem Saviedin by name, but he'd been widely tipped to take over the group's leadership. He was targeted by Israel in an airstrike on Beirut on Friday. Meanwhile, a meeting between the Israeli Defence Minister and the US Defence Secretary has been postponed. It's been reported that Prime Minister Netanyahu blocked Yoav Gallant from going to the meeting with Lloyd Austin. Mozambique votes today in a general election highly likely to deliver victory to the ruling party. Frelimo has governed the nation for the best part of half a century. And Turkey has banned the instant message service Discord. The country's Information Technologies and Communications Authority said the San Francisco-based firm was banned because it contained obscenity and abuse. On Tuesday, Moscow blocked Discord for violating Russian law. And those are the headlines on The Globalist. Now, Saudi Arabia has recently hosted the Global Cybersecurity Forum, an international platform aimed at addressing key issues related to cybersecurity and cyberspace management. Well, among the attendees was Ambassador Shyam Saran, the former Foreign Secretary of India, and he caught up with Monocle's Andrew Muller from the event to discuss the challenges posed by cybercrime, the evolving role of artificial intelligence, and the importance of global cooperation. Andrew began by asking Ambassador Shyam why concerns about the inadequacy of current responses to cyber threats are mounting.
The risks are becoming bigger, and perhaps the response to those risks are not quite up to the mark. Just in the last 1 year, the losses from cyber fraud, from cyber crime, has already crossed something like $10 trillion, which is a pretty high proportion of global GDP. And therefore, it gives you a sense of the scale of the challenge that we are facing. And there seems to be greater, working together by some of these inimical actors, non-state actors or state-supported actors. But the international response, which can only come through, multilateral negotiations, global collaboration, that is perhaps still somewhat, weak. We have not really been able to come up with an effective multilateral and also a collaborative response. Now, the good news is that recently at the United Nations, a convention, UN convention on cybercrime was in fact adopted by consensus. It has not yet been ratified. It has not been implemented so far, but at least it is a step forward because it does lay down compliance, very strict compliance procedures. But you need to go beyond that. We are looking at, for example, how the use of artificial intelligence will make this challenge even much greater than what it is today. And we have not been able to really focus attention on AI in the manner that we should at, for example, the United Nations.
So when you and the other people at this conference are discussing these concerns, what specific scenarios are you talking about?
Well, there may be scenarios which are apparent, but there may be scenarios that we don't even know about. What could be the dangers involved. But it is fair to say that artificial intelligence, for example, creates the possibility of identity theft. It creates the possibility of, creating misperceptions, misunderstanding among states. So it will perhaps multiply, the possibilities of geopolitical contestation beyond what we are already facing. So there are a whole series of, possible risks that are there. And as I said, there may be risks that today we are not even perhaps aware of what can happen. But I think what we are trying to see is whether or not, for example, under the United Nations, can we set up something like what you have on climate change? You have an intergovernmental panel on climate change where you gather scientists from across the world who look at the science involved with respect to the latest developments in terms of science, and also look at what are the ways in which you can respond to those challenges.
And does it strike you that there are any countries which are especially well positioned to take a lead on this? I mean, I guess most obviously India, which is, of course, a huge technological innovator and a huge tech hub.
Well, the good news is that not only India, but there are several other countries in what is known today as the Global South, who have actually quite significant capabilities in this space. The country where I'm sitting right now, which is Saudi Arabia, is really at the very top in the global cybersecurity index. So it has managed to, develop very, very significant capabilities. In India, if you saw the last G20 summit, we were able to come up with a global, a public infrastructure initiative, which is looking at how you can use digital technologies for economic and social development. Much of the payment system today in India is all digital. There is a technology which has given you the possibility of making development much more inclusive than it was in the past. So there are good examples in that sense. So there is certainly a greater interest in the major emerging economies from the Global South to look at how are the ways in which they can take the lead in addressing some of the risks involved, but also looking at what is the potential of these new technologies and what are the ways in which they can be harnessed to global economic and social development. Don't forget that artificial intelligence gives you immense possibilities for leapfrogging. That is, you can like, in India, we really went straight to the mobile telephony. We did not go through the, the stage of, telephone lines, landlines, because of the fact that we had the access to mobile technology. Now, the kind of potential which artificial intelligence offers in this respect is, of course, much, much greater. So I think there is a certain focus on looking at what we can do to create, for example, a capability network, centers of excellence in various countries, both in the north as well as the south, which can really bring about much greater, capacity development amongst developing countries. So there are good things happening, but I would again like to stress that, perhaps today we are still at a stage where the risks are perhaps greater than perhaps the benefits which we are getting.
That was the former Foreign Secretary of India, Ambassador Shyam Saran, in conversation with Monocle's Andrew Muller. You're with Monocle Radio. It's a busy time for the design sector. The London Design Festival has just finished, and here at Monocle, our team is preparing the next issue of the magazine, which will focus on the best and brightest in the industry. Monocle's Tom Edwards caught up with our design editor Nick Manise to talk about the trends and patterns from interiors to the latest materials. And Tom began by asking Nick what had been catching his eye.
we're basically in design festival season, which makes it a lot of fun. But I guess as part of that, my job is to be out and about and kind of, I guess, observing, seeing what people are presenting, seeing the new works that are being unleashed on the world. I'm conscious of not buying into the word trend or using the word trend, but maybe it's just sort of seeing some patterns that are emerging. And I think that's a big part of what my work is.
Well, I know you said you don't want to use the T word. I'm piling straight in. Trends. Come on, you've had your ear and eye to the ground. Well, hopefully you're looking up to see all of these.
Sometimes it's the ground. Sometimes we're talking nice new flooring.
But it's interesting. How quickly can, the discussions around Design Week, for example, some of the conversations you're having, how sort of immediately can that sort of translate into seeing then, pivots in direction, whether in design language or materiality or sustainability or whatever it might be? I guess sometimes it's quite a fast process, right?
Yeah, 100%. But I think maybe the reason I'm cautious to use the word trend, when I think of trend, it's more maybe a colour that's quote unquote in, or a particular finish that's quote unquote in. What the reason I use the word pattern is because it's something that I think you can start to observe over an extended period of time, and while the look and feel of it might change, maybe the idea behind it is consistent. And I think materiality is one of those ones where I've seen it come to the fore more and more in terms of it's one of the first things that people talk about, whether you're an architect or you're a furniture designer. It's almost like the first thing I want to get across is like, this is the material I've used and this is why. And almost always it's tied in with some sort of material technology, or almost the exact opposite, no material technology. It's either we're using the purest, most original thing we can, or we're using something that's been developed out of waste materials. And what we're seeing obviously is people, I guess, moving away from those man-made materials that are tough to recycle or that have microplastics in them, moving towards these other things. And I think what's most exciting, the reason people want to talk about it, is because there is so much material innovation around the newer things. We speak to Sabine Marcellus quite regularly. She's a sort of regular designer that pops up on our design pages, and she talks about the fact that there's a lot of research, and these companies are really looking into interesting materials that we haven't necessarily used before, which means we're actually going to be able to build and make things in a way we haven't previously. So that's one element of it. And then the other is like, hey, we've found this stonemason up in the Alps who's been cutting stone for the same way for 60 years, and it's the purest, most natural thing you can use, and that's why we're building with that. So that's what I mean by patterns. It's the emphasis on materials. It can kind of go in a few different ways.
I think that's really interesting, and this idea about that sort of intentionality, and also this meeting of heritage and innovation. I don't want to put you on the spot, but people do, and you must get this all the time, given the job you do. Oh, well, yes, okay, those are the big pictures, but give me an example. What's like the piece of furniture I need to know about? Or is there an up-and-coming designer that everyone's going to be talking about in 6 months? It's an invidious task to be asked to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Nick, mention a couple of specific things for us. Mark our cards.
Put me on the spot. But that is exactly what I'm here for. I mean, number one is this Australian brand called Ready. They are partners in love and business. I don't know the term that you'd use.
Don't gesture at me.
One of them has Indonesian heritage, and basically they've gone back to Indonesia. They're working with some factories there that were, I guess, essentially creating a whole heap of timber waste. They've gone, hey, can we purchase it? We're going to make shelving and furniture out of reclaimed teak, and it is absolutely gorgeous. And it's one of those ones where it's a very pure material, but ultimately was ending up in waste. They've found a way. So they've tapped into both elements of it. You've got that innovation in terms of this recycling component, but you've also got that that heritage, that tradition of teak being produced in Indonesia. So they're a great example. Another one is a young designer called Daniel Schofield, who makes all sorts of different things, but he's just released, or he's in the process of developing, a stopper lamp that's made out of cork. And what I really like about that is cork as a material in terms of its insulating, its ability to not mold. It comes from trees that don't have to be knocked down to make cork, like it's purely made from bark. And I think that, again, is another one where it's like, maybe it's a material we've overlooked in our homes for a long, long time, but somebody like Daniel is showing that you can make something really, really beautiful out of it.
We may have overlooked it in our homes, certainly not overlooked our coverage of cork in pages of Monocle magazine. And to that point, how do you go about refining all of these things you see? And I'm sure lots of different competing voices wanting to get your eyes on their products or their studios, getting you to visit ateliers and so forth. Look, Design Issue, I guess in a way you sort of wield quite this sort of editorial power. What's your process for kind of decanting all of these learnings into But it's only ever a handful of pages. How do you decide what makes the cut, especially when there's a real design focus in a given issue?
I think that's a really, really challenging part of my job, which is an amazing job. And, I get to essentially go out and have these conversations with all sorts of different amazing designers, architects, material innovation specialists, big brands, small brands. But I think really what comes down to it is it needs to be doing a few things. It needs to be, we have a global audience. It needs to be applicable on a global scale. There needs to be a lesson there that you can apply. This is a Sydney-based design studio working with teak in Indonesia, but can those same lessons be applied to a Stockholm-based, furniture maker who has connections to Finnish forests? It's those sorts of, translatable lessons that we want to be tapping into. And then the other thing, it's just ideas and solutions that can kind of push any sort of design conversation forward. And if we can find somebody that's doing that, then we certainly want to make sure that they land on our pages.
I like that, Nick. Just finally, what's next for you? You mentioned you're in the midst of a bit of a kind of busy season. I don't know, by the hour, day, week.
Well,
calibrate Nick Monice's diary for the
forthcoming week. We're in Istanbul for the Monocle Quality of Life conference, and that is actually a perfect little plug to our October issue, which is now on newsstands. We've been talking a lot about the design issue, which is out in later this month and into November. But as for what's on the newsstands right now, it's the October issue. There's an amazing special on multidisciplinary design studios in Turkey, people that can kind of do it all. So I definitely would recommend checking that out.
That was Nick Monice in conversation with Tom Edwards there. For more from the world of design, tune in to the latest edition of The Entrepreneurs at 2000 London time, right here on Monocle Radio. This is The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
.47 in Ljubljana, 7:47 a.m. here in London. Let's get the Balkans news. To do that, there is only one person, Guy Delaunay, Monocle's Balkans correspondent, who can bring us up to date. Very good morning to you, Guy.
Morning, Emma, and morning all.
Let's talk about the floods in Bosnia. The images that are coming out of the country are devastating, aren't they?
It's really grim, and it's a shame in a way that this has happened and it's got relatively little attention internationally because, of course, there's so much else going on in the world at the moment, which is terrible as well. But for the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina, who, let's face it, haven't had it easy over the last few decades, this was a particularly devastating event. People were saying it was one of the worst things that they've seen since the war 30 years ago. And the landslides which followed these floods last Friday destroyed entire villages, and the people who built up their lives there saw everything washed away, and 22 people so far are confirmed to have died in these floods and landslides. And that's just devastating again for a country which has suffered so much over the years.
One of the key issues here is that the fact that the collapse of a quarry is what caused a large part of the destruction, and the questions are now being asked about why this happened.
That's right. And of course, people are looking at whether the way that Bosnia is governed and the fact that the country is really dysfunctional has contributed to the destruction and the deaths. So the place which suffered the most was a village called Donja Jablanica, and it's in a very picturesque part of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's along the banks of the Neretva River. If you want to go there around and about, there's beautiful hiking and mountain biking to be done in the valleys and the hills that surround it. And this village was entirely wiped out. The pictures from Donja Jablanica were absolutely horrifying. You could see that the village mosque, for example, was up to its roof line in water, mud, debris. And this was from the quarry which was above the village. And the authorities say they believe this quarry didn't have a permit to operate, even though this quarry had been there for a matter of decades. People from the village, people from the surrounding area are saying, look, this is symptomatic of what goes on in Bosnia and Herzegovina. People are allowed to do things with impunity, and it's causing real damage to the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And this isn't the first landslide from a quarry this year. There was one actually in April as well, in which nobody died, fortunately. But this sort of thing has happened before, and it's putting people's lives at risk. And there's also the question of illegal logging, whether the deforestation of hillsides in this Neretva Valley has caused the floods to sweep through and the landslides to sweep through villages in the way that they did. And people are getting very angry now. As the initial grief and shock subsides somewhat, they're looking for people to blame, and quite rightly so.
Let's move to Kosovo, which has partially lifted a ban on the entry of Serbian goods. This is widely seen as a political gesture, and what had happened is it made the Kosovans very cross.
Yes, well, indeed, because, when you've got goods coming in, and we need to be careful about how we phrase this, because if you're Serbian, you don't say this is a border, it's a crossing point between central Serbia and the province of Kosovo. If you're Kosovo, it's a national border, and you've got the right to police it as you wish, and it's imports. For ordinary people in Kosovo, the majority of whom are ethnic Albanian, they just rather liked getting things, goods, food, whatever it might have been, in from Serbia, which was sold in supermarkets and other shops at reasonable prices. If you're blocking the line of goods coming in from Serbia, you're making life more expensive for Kosovo consumers. And that's exactly what's happened. People were not impressed. And they just saw it as Prime Minister Albin Kurti once again trying to put one over on Serbia and the Serbian community within Kosovo, but actually scoring a bit of an own goal. The internationals weren't impressed either. They pointed out that Kosovo's a member of the Central European Free Trade Agreement, and this is obviously a violation of free trade. So Kosovo is coming under heavy manners from Brussels, saying if you don't reverse this, you face being excluded from all these talks about EU integration and the money that comes with it. And that's the crucial bit, perhaps the last part. And just before these meetings of this Berlin process, as it's called, and just before a meeting of the Central European Free Trade Agreement parties, Kosovo's lifted this ban on the entry of Serbian goods at one crossing and one crossing only, and it's obviously going to be very inconvenient for the drivers of the vehicles concerned, because they're going to be searching them by hand. They don't have any scanners, but it's a step in the right direction as far as a lot of people concerned. And even Serbia, one minister said, the trade minister has said, it's shown that we can actually have rapprochement with the ethnic Albanians in Kosovo.
Kai Delorney, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Ljubljana. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Finally, Europe has a film festival dedicated to journalism. It's called Press Play, and it's being held in the capital of Czechia, Prague. I'm joined now by the Prague-based journalist Rob Cameron. Good morning, Rob.
Good morning to you.
So tell us, what's it all about?
Well, the people behind this film festival, which had its premiere last night at Kino Atlas, the Atlas Cinema, which is near the Hotel Hilton in the center of Prague, say that it is to address a crisis in journalism and also the film industry. They argue that these days, for a start, the traditional business models in journalism have, of course, been upended. And obviously, it's much easier to make content these days. But the problem is that we are just drowning in a sea of content. And it is increasingly difficult, really, to get good quality, high quality content that addresses sort of urgent social issues. And they say that the same thing is happening in film as well, as we are directed more and more to, bingeable series on providers like Netflix and so on. So they say that it's time to bring back, hard-hitting journalism, and they want to highlight and showcase the best that journalism has to offer around the world with this new festival of documentaries that is underway in Prague.
So just explain to us, Rob, the festival, is it about journalism itself, or is it another festival which allows high-quality journalism through documentary making to be showcased?
I think it's a bit of both, because the films on today, if you look at the programme, there are a couple by Al Jazeera. One is the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, which is the killing of the Palestinian-American journalist by an Israeli sniper in the West Bank, and also a documentary about October the 7th, the Hamas attacks on Israel. So very, very timely pieces there. But there are also films about journalists as well, about uncovering corruption in Venezuela. There's a film about women in the Czech media. So I think it's a bit of both, mostly about journalists and their work, but also how the media has been used to unveil corruption and wrongdoing around the world.
So it's also the big question of funding. The film that you mentioned straight away was one produced by Al Jazeera. They arguably have a little bit more money than those independent journalists who are scrabbling to actually tell stories on shoestring budgets.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that this festival wants to address, as they say, that, yes, these days it is easier to produce and share both written and audio-visual content, but of course, and it's also easier to circumvent censorship. But at the same time, there is just so much content out there, often provided, by algorithms that all our streaming services that we all subscribe to use, that means that high quality, incredible pieces of journalism that can really change the world, they often get lost. They are needles in a haystack, to use the words of the festival organisers.
Tell us a little bit more about the fact that it says this is Europe's first film festival dedicated to journalism, and how accurate a description is that? Because we hear of high quality festivals happening absolutely everywhere. So what is it about Press Play that wants to mark itself out as different?
Yes, I don't know whether that claim is 100% true, because obviously there are a lot of film festivals around Europe, and there are even a lot of festivals in the Czech Republic. And I think that perhaps could be their biggest challenge if this festival is to survive and prosper. Because just looking at this country, there are already very good film festivals, highly rated festivals at the International Karlovy Vary Film Festival, which has a number of has a documentary section and a number of documentaries in it, and of course a lot of those documentaries are produced by journalists themselves. There is the One World Film Festival in Prague itself, which is a festival of documentary film, and some of the films appear to me to be the same kind of stuff that is on at Press Play. And there are a number of other film festivals around the country. So I think some viewers at least potentially will just see this as just one more festival, and the fact that it is about journalism, films and documentaries about journalists doing their work. The question is whether that will be enough to get people through the doors.
Rob, we've got 20 seconds before time runs out on us. If you had to go and see one thing or recommend one thing from this festival, what might it be?
I would go and see the film on Maduro's Venezuela. It's called A Dangerous Assignment, Uncovering Corruption in Maduro's Venezuela. That looks really interesting. It's made this year, and I think that could really be something to look out for.
Rob Cameron, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Prague. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers, Chris Chermack and Laura Kramer. Our researcher was George Ruskin. Our studio manager was Flynn Simons. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. And The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. I hope you can join me for that if you can. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.